What is the Christian view of minimum wage? Hi, I'm Dave Arnott. Thanks for joining me for another segment of Christian Economics. In our forthcoming book, Dave Arnott and Sergei Seidamatov, about Christianity and capitalism, we lay out 10 commandments of economics and try to use those commandments to decide macroeconomic issues. Our subject today is minimum wage. And to decide that issue, we tap into two of our 10 commandments of economics. One is people should be free. The second is work is good. To establish the idea that people should be free, you're welcome to think of the famous painting by William Holman Hunt with Jesus standing on one side of a door where there's no handle. The assumption is that we are on the other side of that, and Jesus is saying to us from Revelation 3:20, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hears my voice, I will open the door." But the point is, we have to open the door. Our belief is that because Jesus gives us the freedom to accept or reject his offer, we should also be free in our economic policies. Our second assumption comes from the second of 10 commandments of economics, and that is that work is good. We see God working at the very opening of Genesis. Then he creates Adam and Eve and he puts them to work. Work seems to be good. Jay Richards, in his book Money, Greed, and God, talks about how work is a blessing. It's a part of creation, not a part of the fall. Now, work got difficult because of the fall, but it's part of creation. Hugh Welchel, in his book How Then Shall We Work, says essentially the same thing. Work is a gift from God. We should do it. We should be allowed to work. So let's look at about 4 or 5 points here based on people should be free and work is good. What should the minimum wage be based on our Christian worldview? Or the question more importantly, should there be one at all? First, let's look at the point. Minimum wage is the only thing that causes both evils of macroeconomics. That's unemployment and inflation. Unemployment, obviously. I mean, the higher you raise the minimum wage, the less demand there's going to be for people at that wage. It causes unemployment. That was without question. The only question is, how much does it cause? The second is it causes inflation. I mean, the definition of inflation is increasing wages and prices. When you increase wages, you cause inflation. It's a good study that actually shows that poor people buy more minimum wage produced goods than do the rich. Therefore, the inflation caused by an increasing minimum wage harms poor. And certainly biblically, we're supposed to help the poor. So it causes inflation. The other thing is, rich people can delay purchases. Poor people can't. They have to buy milk and diapers on the daily market. Inflation hurts the poor more than the rich. Another point is, if you set a minimum wage of, say, $15 an hour, that means you're discriminating against anybody who produces less than $15 an hour. And you're saying to them, you can't work. There is a scripture that says, pay the worker his wages. Well, if you discriminate against people and say you can't work, then you can't pay them a wage because they're not working. The assumption of that scripture is that people work. So inflation hurts the poor. A higher minimum wage discriminates against people who can't produce $15 an hour. Here's what some people will think. Can't we just pay them $15? There's something called laws of economics. Let me first explain a physics law and see if this makes sense. You know, you can load an airplane with fuel, and it can fly above physical equilibrium for a few hours. But as you know, as it's flying, it's burning fuel. And eventually, this plane has to return to physical equilibrium, where the pressure on top of the plane is the same as the pressure borne by the wheels on the tarmac. Economics has similar laws. You can load up a coffee shop with dollars, and you can pay people who are producing $12 an hour, $15 an hour, but each hour you're burning $3 of money. Eventually this coffee shop is going to run out of money and return to economic equilibrium. Look, the laws are the same, physics or economics. It is not sustainable to pay somebody $15 an hour when they're creating $12 in value. So what our objective should be is to increase the value created by minimum wage people. How do we do that? Look, I've been doing seminars for 15 years with a good guy named David Deviney. He explains stress this way. If you think of it in order, 1, 2, and 3. 1 is people have no stress. There's no reason to get out of bed. Second is people who have what's called eustress. Eustress is good stress. You want to go to work. You want to do something. You want to improve your life. That's why you're listening to this podcast. That's why you read a book by Thomas Sowell. That's why you do just about anything in life. You have eustress. That's good stress. At the bottom is distress. And this is where people can't deal with life. We have currently mixed the definition of distress and eustress. People earning minimum wage should be in eustress. That means good stress. My students are in my economics class. I want them wondering, what's he going to ask today? How do I pass this course? How do I get out of this course? How do I go to the next course? How do I graduate from the university? How do I get a job? How do I move up? People earning minimum wage should not be comfortable. They should have eustress. They should be always asking the question, how do I make a greater contribution to the world? If you love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and spirit, and you love your neighbor as you love yourself, you will create value for your neighbor by creating value more than minimum wage. If you love yourself, you'll make a profit while doing so. Listen, some people will suggest a very complex minimum wage. And if you think about it, to be fair, it really has to be, doesn't it? So people in cities like in California where it's more expensive, you'll demand a higher minimum wage for them. People in Omaha, a lower minimum wage. So geography, you'd have to adjust. Number 2, you'd have to adjust for the different kinds of jobs being done. People working at McDonald's perhaps will have a lower minimum wage than an attorney might have. So you have different wages there. Third, and this is the one that I've never heard anybody discuss, you would have, to be fair, you'd have to have a minimum wage that went up during growth times and down during recessions. We've had 11 recessions since World War II. We're going to have another one. When there's a recession, you would have to lower minimum wage. Hold it. That's only 3 suggestions for adjusting the minimum wage. The more complex your formula becomes, the closer it becomes to what's called the equilibrium wage. The equilibrium wage is the ultimate form of freedom that we talked about in our first commandment of economics from the forthcoming book by Dave Arnott and Sergei Seidamatov, where we say there's 10 commandments of economics. The first is people should be free. People should be free to vote. Look, at the equilibrium wage, everybody gets to vote. My wife voted recently. She was out of work. She went and voted with a prospective employer. The prospective employer looked at her and voted back. They made a decision. We believe this freedom that comes from our biblical commands says that my wife and her prospective employer should be free to make their own decision and to set their own wage. When everybody votes, it's called the equilibrium wage. It's really the greatest form of democracy. Minimum wage steps between the employer and the employee and says you do not have freedom. You must do what we tell you. It forces people out of the workplace. Unemployment goes up. People are not working. Therefore, it violates our second command of economics, which says work is good. So when we look at this idea of minimum wage, it becomes very clear to us from the Christian worldview that people should be free and that people should work. Minimum wage violates both of those economic commandments that we find. Okay? Thank you for joining me on this segment of Christian Economics. I'm Dave Arnott, where our motto at Christian Economics is, fear God, tell the truth, earn a profit. See you next time.